Well, well, okay, tonight we have passed a milestone. We're going to get into verbs. Up till now, for months and months, we've been looking at the noun system. And in your textbook, turn to chapter 15, page 149. And we've got Introduction to Verbs. This chapter has no homework assignment in the workbook. It's just going to introduce us to verbs first by using the English and then the Greek. And we're not going to be memorizing any vocabulary or paradigms. That'll be for next week. But the purpose is just to understand it for now. So there's a very good exegetical insight that I thought we would read together tonight. Maybe I could have one of you guys read for us. It's on page 149. Is there a volunteer?
Sure, I'll read this.
Okay.
In some translations of Matthew 18:18, it sounds like Jesus promised his disciples that whatever they bound on earth would be bound in heaven, and whatever they loosed on earth would be loosed in heaven. I just want to say parenthetically,
Yes.
That's exactly what the King James says.
Yes, it is. Yes.
In other words, they had the power to bind and loose, and heaven, i.e. God, would simply back up their decrees. But the matter is not quite so simple, and actions described in heaven are future perfect passives, which could be translated, will have already been bound in heaven, will have already been loosed in heaven. In other words, the heavenly decree confirming the earthly one is based on a prior verdict. This is the language of the law court. Jewish legal issues were normally decided in Jesus' day by elders in the synagogue community, later by rabbis. Many Jewish people believed that the authority of heaven stood behind the earthly judges when they decided cases based on a correct understanding of God's law. This process came to be called binding and loosing. Jesus' contemporaries often envision God's justice in terms of a heavenly court. By obeying God's law, the earthly court simply ratified the decrees of the heavenly court. In Matthew 18:15 through 20, Christians who follow the careful procedures of verses 15 through 17 may be assured that they will act on the authority of God's court when they decide cases. Just as we struggle to affirm absolutes in a relativist culture, Christians today sometimes wonder how to exercise discipline lovingly against a sinning member of the church. In this text, Jesus provides an answer. When the person refuses to turn from sin after repeated and loving confrontation, the church, by disciplining the person, simply recognizes the spiritual reality that is already true in God's sight. Craig S. Keener.
Mm-hmm. To me, that's kind of a comforting thought, because God knows hearts, doesn't make mistakes like humans do. And if it were merely a human verdict in a court, it wouldn't have much confidence that it's right. But with God directing affairs.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I've seen the same thing repeated in a number of other places too. Like one of them was Psalm 37:4, because I stared at that for a long time, which in the King James reads, "Delight thyself in the Lord, and He will give thee the desires of thy heart." I'm going, not what I need, what I desire. And then I struggled with it for a long time, and I was. And at the same time, I had been wrestling with what in the world did it mean when God was saying that David was a man after his own heart. And I used to pray, for years and years, God, what do you mean by a man after your own heart? And eventually I came to the realization that when you were trying to follow God's will, what was actually happening is he was changing your heart so that what you desired was what he always wanted to give you in the first place.
That was well explained.
Well,
And that's
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of like the same idea here.
I think
So the
you're
Lord's
right.
Prayer is really instructional about not just prayer, but about our understanding of relationship. So this Matthew verse, if we don't take things out of their full context, actually the context makes it pretty clear that the thing it's talking about, binding and loosing, is specifically about this discipline issue.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But so
Yeah.
many people want to take that
Way
verse and
beyond.
just apply it to whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, but if we, in terms of the heart, if we look at what the Lord said when he was asked how to pray, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Uh-huh.
That's the beginning. Now what? Right? Forgive us this day our daily, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who
Mhm.
trespass against us. And so before we can even begin talking about what we need and what we ought to be forgiving,
Mhm.
and how what did I forgive or not give, the first thing we're supposed to be talking to God about is we want your kingdom.
Uh-huh.
We want your will to be
Mhm.
done.
Uh-huh.
And I have a good friend who I won't name, who I something like 6 months ago, I said to him, well, when we pray, we really ought to be asking God what he wants
Mhm.
for us. I said, that's the place to start. When I'm praying about a thing, I should be asking the Lord, what do you want? And,
Uh-huh.
he knew better. He knew this, but he said, wow, that's powerful. And I don't mean to pat myself on the back. I'm sorry. This insight is exactly right. I'm glad the Greek really reads this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we look at the whole scripture in context, it shouldn't be any big surprise.
Yeah.
That we take our direction from heaven. And every time we read something that says, the Lord will grant my heart's desire, well, that verse begins with,
Delight
thyself
Which
in
is-
the Lord.
What's delighting yourself in the Lord? It's
Seeking his will.
seeking what God wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's on getting God to change your heart, which is also be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed.
Yeah.
By the renewing of your mind. Who's renewing our minds? Well, the Lord is when we're in his will.
Mhm.
I think we're all on the same page there, and
Very good.
it's wonderful. Okay, overview. In this chapter, we will learn the basic grammar relating to English verbs, about a verb's subject, agreement, person, number, tense, time, voice, and mood, the main components of the Greek verb, stem, connecting vowel, personal ending, and the concept of aspect and its significance for a proper understanding of the Greek verb. And that fourth one about aspect is why I made copies from 3 different editions of the book, because, well, I'll tell you when we get to it.
Okay.
In chapter 5, I covered the basic grammar relating to nouns. Now it's time to begin with verbs. However, you already know much of the verbal grammar from our discussion of me in chapter 8. And we've been talking about verbs from time to time already when we do the exercises. So we've got a little bit under our belts already. Most of the following is a review. A verb is a word that describes an action or a state of being. I am studying Greek, that's an action. Greek is the heavenly language, that's a state of being.
Mhm.
Is. And by the way, we've already talked about that verb is. It's an equative verb. It's kind of like a mathematical equation. Left of that word is Greek, that's the subject. And to the right of that verb is the heavenly language, that's the predicate nominative. Do you remember those terms?
Mhm.
Okay. 15.3 principal parts. In English, verbs have 3 principal parts from which all tense variations are formed. Present tense, I eat, present is I eat, or I was eating, or I will eat. Now that doesn't make sense to me because was eating is past tense.
It's the word form, right? Like those. So the principal parts aren't tenses. They're the word forms we use to make other tenses, like
Right.
eat, eat, and then we have ate.
He's just
and then we have
focusing on the
eat,
eat, not the
yeah.
to be that's stuck in
Oh my
there.
gosh.
Okay.
In the past tense is I ate,
I'm
and he says past perfect, but actually it's present perfect in English. I have eaten. The past perfect tense in English is I had eaten. Yeah.
um,
And I would be lovely to hear someone say that last.
I was eating.
I was eaten.
Yeah,
I
was
I
eaten
congratulate
by
you.
cannibals.
I can only think of one person who could actually
I'm
say
not
that, and that
even-
would have been Jonah.
I'm not
Okay.
even sure.
He could have actually said that.
okay.
I don't think anybody
This
else-
is all a little bit of a problematic discussion.
It is.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm afraid this is a little
but
hard to follow because
forget under
all
present.
right.
If he had stopped with the I eat, I would agree.
That would have been better.
But I was eating. That's a past
That's perfect.
past
Oh,
continuous.
past continuing, sorry.
Yeah.
Or I will
And
eat.
the
That's
others-
future
That's
tense.
future tense, yeah. And the
Uh,
conjugation, see, this is a problem because eat conjugates this way, other things might not.
Yeah.
This is,
So I think this is
Example.
not the best example.
No, it's
because I
not.
think what he's trying to say is there are English verbs where the form of the word changes in these three principal parts, and we make all the other tenses out of those three principal parts. So
That's
fly
correct.
is a better one.
That's
Fly,
correct.
right? We can have I was flying and I fly. It's the same word, different tenses. But we also have tenses that require flew
Yeah. Past
or
tense.
even flown.
Flown. Past.
And those
yeah.
are the three principal parts of
And that-
Yeah.
the verb
I mean,
to
this
fly.
is a fine thing, but he didn't say it quite right. Drew. You
No,
said it
he-
much better.
No, he
Yeah.
didn't.
Okay. Now I've got a handout here. I did it. This is kind of something I've been doing for a long time. I've got English principal parts of irregular English verbs. And
Um,
I'm going to give,
I'm wondering if he's, like for setting us up with the Greek. In the Greek, do you use the present tense in some fashion to talk about future, or is there actually a future tense?
there is a future tense,
Okay.
but he'll get to that
All right.
because he's presenting English
All right.
first. And
Yeah, I
then
just
he's-
didn't know if the reason for this form is somehow mapped
Yeah.
to Greek, but it doesn't. Really.
Well,
Okay.
this handout may or may not help you. It's English principal parts of verbs. It's first column is the infinitive, because in our English dictionaries, we list the infinitive as the lexical form. And then the next column is the present tense. The third column is past tense. The fourth column is present perfect tense. And it uses an auxiliary verb, have, to form the perfect tense. So I listed all the ones I could think of. There's probably others, but here, I'll give this to you, right? And you can put that on, post that if you want.
Okay.
I don't want to spend time on this right now,
These are all English.
yeah, English principal parts.
Okay.
You'll find that in Greek, they don't use the same principal parts, but we'll get to that in a few
So
minutes.
is this really not? I'm just wondering if this
This
will
is
actually be reused.
auxiliary information.
Okay. All right.
All right. Usually the past tense of verbs is formed by adding ed. Kick, kicked, kicked. I kick now. I kicked yesterday. I have kicked in the past. Other times you change the stem. Swim. I swim today. I swam yesterday. I have swum in my past. Sometimes the past and perfect and past perfect, I think it needs to be called present perfect, are identical. Study, studied, studied. In the appendix, there's a chart showing all the basic forms of the English verb on page 427. This is a useful page in the appendix. You'll probably want to refer to that from time to time. Maybe let's just turn to it right now just to look at it just a little bit. 427. Yeah, here he's got the terms correct. Let's look at the top group. This is the verb study is a regular verb. The verb eat is an irregular verb. Goodness.
I'm kidding. Why in the world did he have to make eat for this example?
I don't know.
I'm just picturing someone calmly sitting there going, I am being eaten.
I'm just thinking it's not,
mosquito.
it doesn't mean the same thing even. So
Okay, if
it's kind of a misapplication because it doesn't have the same meaning. I mean, okay, whatever.
well, just to let you know,
What page was this again? I'm sorry.
427.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
trying
you.
to read this. And why is
So-
this significant?
Okay, the names of the tenses in English. Past simple. I studied is a regular verb. It adds ed to form its past.
Okay.
And I ate. That's an irregular verb. He's got them listed. The top group is past, the middle group is present, and the future group is at the bottom.
Oh, I see what he's doing.
Yeah.
All right. Just is this
It's-
sampling?
Usually the arrangement is present, past, and then future, but he did it that way. I guess because that's the sequence in time.
Okay, the label columns. So let's take studied. I studied, and then he has below this, I was studied, which doesn't
It's
mean the
different.
same-
It's
it
a
doesn't
different
mean
voice.
the
It's
same
a different
thing.
voice.
That's
Okay.
Passive,
Wait.
passive
active.
voice. Yeah, he
Right.
doesn't. Yeah, irregular passive. See,
Oh, that's what that means.
Yeah,
Oh, active,
and
passive.
irregular.
Okay, all right. Now I
Okay.
understand why he's doing it. Okay.
regular active and irregular active,
Sorry.
and then
Thank you.
regular passive and irregular passive. And then the column headings, past simple. The second column is past progressive. That's not simple action anymore. It's continuous action in past time. I was studying for a regular verb. I was eating. And
Mhm.
regular passive and irregular passive is I was being studied and I was
Yeah.
being eaten.
Okay.
That's continuous action in past time. And then past perfect, I had studied, I had eaten, I had been studied, and I had been eaten. Now that's the correct term for that English tense, past perfect, using the past tense of the verb to have. I had, not have.
Where are you? I had?
Top
Yes.
right.
Right, top
Oh,
right.
okay.
Yeah.
I was jumping ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Now,
Yep. Yep.
the present simple, the group horizontally that talks about present tense, got present simple, present progressive, or continuous is another word for progressive, and present perfect. I study, that's simple present for a regular verb. I eat, an irregular verb, simple.
Okay.
And then regular passive, I am studied and I am eaten. And you can follow them through, think
Right.
about it, and I
So
think it'll become
So the
clear.
points of these are that we have so we have active versus passive voice shown
Yeah.
here. That's important because the specific conjugation of the English verbs is not really what he's getting at. I'm not sure why that's important in his
Okay.
diagrams, but because we should know those or look them up.
Yeah.
But
These are
these
different categories of meaning a verb, which the English uses auxiliary verbs to accomplish.
Yes, right. But
Yeah.
we still have the past, we have the past progressive and past perfect, and we have active and passive.
Yeah.
What that word is?
Voices.
Voice.
Yeah. Okay, just know that it's there, and you might need to use that in the future.
Yeah, I guess the real thing is he's just pointing out that this is the structure to which we're accustomed
Yeah.
to express certain concepts.
Yes.
And Greek
Well-
has to express essentially the same concept, but he's probably going to introduce it.
That's right.
Exactly the same way.
So back to 15.3. He called it the past perfect, but here in the text, but in the what we just looked at, the English verb,
We'll get to the Greek
he's got the
tenses.
correct terminology. It's present perfect, not past perfect.
Okay, so we'll get to the Greek tenses and aspects
Yeah,
below that
we
later.
We will in just a
Okay.
little while. 15.4, person. There are three persons, first, second, and third. First person is the person speaking, I for singular and we for plural. The second person is the person being spoken to, you for singular and you for plural. And by the way, my method for distinguishing singular and plural second person is I put single dot above the O for singular and 2 dots above the O for plural. It's just, you can do it different ways. That's the way I do it. The King James used thee and thou for singular you and you for plural you. The third person is the person or thing being spoken about, he, she, or it for singular, or they for plural. All nouns and pronouns except personal pronouns. Those are in the third person. We've already studied personal pronouns. They do appear in first and second as well as third. 15.5. Number refers to whether a verb is singular, referring to one thing, or plural, referring to more than one thing. I am the teacher, they are the students. Agreement. The verb must agree with its subject and person and number. If a subject is singular, the verb must be singular. The subject is third person, the verb must be third person. For example, you would not say, Bill say to the class that there are no tests. What would you say? Bill says to the class that there is no test.
Assuming it's one.
Yeah. Since Bill and test are singular, you would say Bill says to the class that there is no test. The presence or absence of the S at the end of says and the difference between are and is are examples of agreement. You would also not say I were here. I is singular, but were is plural. You would say I was here. We do that automatically in English. We don't even think about it. Time refers to when the action of the verb takes place. In English, the different times are past, present, and future. Tense in English refers to both the time when the action of the verb takes place and the form of the verb. If you study your Greek right now, then the verb is in the present tense, I study. In the sentence, I see the ball, the verb see is in the present tense and indicates an action occurring in the present time. If you're planning to do it tomorrow, then the verb is in the future tense, I will study. English forms the future with the helping verb will or shall. If you did your homework last night, then the verb is in the past tense, I studied. English often forms a simple past by adding ed to the verb if it's regular. Study becomes studied in past time. While it is obvious, it bears repeating that the time of the verb is from the standpoint of the speaker or writer, not the reader. What is present to the biblical writer may or may not be present to us. I could repeat this in every chapter to the end of the book, but I won't. Now, aspect. This is the thing that gets confusing. That's the reason I gave you this handout. In the second edition of the book, which is what I used when I first started teaching, I thought he presented it very simply and very well and adequately. But as time went on, the third edition started to add some confusion to it. And the fourth edition, which we have here, is even more confusing. So I'm going to go back to the second edition in the terminology that he uses. And I've scratched through it in my book and made copies for you in the handouts, and I highlighted the portions that pertain. So let's look at the handout first before we look at our textbook. The second edition in talking about aspect. I'm sorry that you guys on the screen don't have this in front of you, but I'll read it, and I think David will post this perhaps.
Yeah.
Okay. Try just to understand this for now. This is just one little section, 15.7. It's a different number. Yeah, it's totally different. Aspect. This is perhaps the most difficult concept to grasp in Greek verbs, and yet it is the most important and most misunderstood. The basic genius of the Greek verb is not its ability to indicate when the action of the verb occurs, which is time, but what type of action it describes, or what we will call aspect. In Greek, there are three aspects. The continuous aspect means that the action of the verb is thought of as an ongoing process. This is like the English continuous aspect. I am eating. They were studying. Now stop for a second.
So those are our progressive tense.
Progressive or continuous. Both of those words, in my mind, mean the same thing. I am eating is continuous aspect in present time. They were studying is continuous aspect in past time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. The undefined aspect means that the action of the verb is thought of as a simple event without commenting on whether or not it is a process. Footnote.
Simple in the sense of discrete event?
I guess that would be an adequate term.
Like,
but,
for instance, I would say, generally speaking, an explosion is a discrete event.
Oh, no.
No.
Okay, I think what you're getting at that, it's there's a term, just a minute. I got to get the right word. I'm sorry I did not have it on the tip of my tongue, but there is a term that is essentially what you're saying there, Ray. What was the word you used? Is discrete?
Discrete event is an event that has a defined beginning, it's brief, and it ends, and you can say how long it took.
Okay, if that's what you mean by discrete, yeah, I guess you could say that's undefined aspect. However, that an undefined aspect could mean something that was an ongoing process, but it's not telling you anything about that. It could also mean
not a discrete event necessarily.
that it's a repetitive or a habitual action, but it's not telling you that. It's simply undefined. Let's stick with the word undefined, because it's just simply not telling you what kind of action it is. An example that shows the importance of these distinctions is Jesus' words to his disciples. If anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Deny and take up are undefined. It doesn't tell you whether it's something that happens just once or whether it's happens multiple times. Same thing with take up. It's simply undefined. It just doesn't tell you that. While follow is continuous. And I wrote the Greek words and parsed them for you in case you're interested. The aspect of deny and take up does not tell us anything about the nature of those actions except that they are to occur. But the aspect of follow emphasizes that the commitment to discipleship involves a continual action.
So then in the Greek, deny and take up could be something that happened once, or they could be something that happened more than once.
That's right. And that it's simply undefined. They don't tell you.
Follow is something
emphasizes
that does not end.
Right. Yeah. Which in this context is a day-to-day action. And then footnote 3. Another example would be how do you do, which is undefined, versus how are you doing, which is continuous. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the first two aspects we're talking about are continuous and undefined. And that would be I studied or I was studying.
That's correct.
Okay.
If you're looking
All
at that chart. Mhm.
Okay.
Now there is another aspect which we're not going to get to yet. These are the first two aspects that we're going to talk about. And for quite a while, these are the only two we need to consider. Now that's how it was presented in the second edition, which was nice and simple and used just those two terms, continuous and undefined. And those are the terms I'm going to be using, even though our fourth edition textbook uses different terms. The third edition, which is, I don't know whether to read all this. Yeah, I think I will read third edition. Some of it's repeating what we just read. What?
I'm looking at the fourth edition here.
Yeah, don't look at that yet.
Okay.
Look at the
All right.
third edition
Yes,
now.
I did look at that.
Yeah.
I did.
Okay. This is from the third edition. You guys online, just listen, please. Aspect. This is perhaps the most difficult concept to grasp in Greek verbs, and yet the most important and most misunderstood. The basic genius of the Greek verb is not its ability to indicate when the action of the verb occurs, time, but what type of action it describes, or what we'll call aspect. In Greek, there are three aspects. The continuous aspect, that's the same term he used in the second edition, means that the action of the verb is thought of as an ongoing process. This is like the English continuous aspect, I am eating, or they were studying. The undefined aspect means that the action of the verb is thought of as a simple event, without commenting on whether or not it is a process. I ate or she left. Footnote 3. It is argued by some that undefined is not an aspect, and by undefined we simply mean the absence of aspect. This may or may not be technically correct, but it may be a helpful way of thinking for the time being. The undefined aspect is the absence of any specific aspect. An example that shows the importance of these distinctions is Jesus' words to his disciples. And this is what we just read in the other one. Another example, this might be helpful, and they were is Jesus' trial. In Mark 15:19, we read, and they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. That's the ESV version. You get the sense from the English that they beat him over and over again, but you may not get that. You may not get that they spit on him repeatedly. And uptuon is explicitly continuous. They did it over and over again, which is expressed in another version. Again and again, they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. This is then countered by Jesus' words of forgiveness from the cross. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That's the ESV of Luke 23:34. While this translation obscures, what this translation obscures is that Jesus said it over and over again. Again is explicitly continuous. Wow.
Is
There is a third aspect in Greek, the perfective, but you'll not meet it again until chapter 25.
so Carl, what's the what is confused? I mean, there's that one comment about the parade versus the helicopter didn't seem helpful at all to me, but
No.
the rest of this seems good. Is there something wrong with it? Or?
Well, in the 4th edition, he introduces different terms.
I meant the 3rd edition versus the 2nd. It seemed like the 3rd edition mostly just added some more examples.
Yeah.
That helicopter and parade thing I found totally unhelpful. But
Okay.
otherwise, it seemed like it was a decent presentation, and it seemed the same as the other one, except it added some examples.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the 4th edition, which we're using, I scratched out the terms that he's using in the 4th edition and went back to the 2nd edition terms.
This going to cause us a problem with our book.
Yeah, and the reason he did that is he's making a concession to the linguist's language. Now, if it's going to confuse you, I won't read it.
Okay. I want what you just said there. I'm.
Yeah.
Well, this is an important question then, because if the terminology that's being used, undefined versus perfect, when I go to look up a verb in a lexicon, which is it going to say, perfect or undefined?
Okay.
How do I know what
There's
you're doing?
Two things here at play. There's a tense called perfect, which is not the same thing as a perfective aspect.
Oh,
Well, no, that's okay. But when I'm looking at the aspect, how are the lexicons? What are they going to call it?
The lexicon is going to give you the tense name. Then the lexicon is not going to give you anything about aspect.
They're not going to give you an aspect.
No, that's what you have to determine from the form of the verb. Not the lexical form, but the form, the form that, I'm sorry to stumble about the term.
Well, no, but like, okay, so I have the analytical lexicon, which actually shows the form. It actually shows exactly the word that shows up in the New Testament.
Yes.
And it
That's
notes
the inflected form.
The inflected form.
Yeah.
And it actually it has verbiage to describe what that means.
Yes.
So when you say he's making concession to linguists, I think it's important for us when we're looking at someone else's writing here to know how they're describing this thing. Yeah. Because if they don't use the word undefined, and rather they call it a perfect aspect, a perfective aspect, I guess we should know that, right?
But I'm gonna say, there was something that I saw in one of these which kind of led me to believe that over time, or by opinions of different linguists, they use they have used different terminology. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
if
they
that's the
do.
case, then I would think one
Would-
lexicon or one
some will be
reference
one
book
way and,
may name it one thing and another may name it another, and you might have to check each one to
Okay.
see.
well, so
How's
for,
that author-
we've seen that we need to have a convention we're using in class, but it
Yeah.
also seems to know we're going to be using lexicon resources here. And we
Yes.
should understand these words and,
Yes, you should, and
Okay.
you will.
okay,
The names of the tenses are not going to vary. It's just the aspect that's the terminology of the aspect.
but that's part of the verb, right?
No, that's not.
It's not.
It is part of the verb, but it's not part of the the name of the tense
not the
in the
lexic-
lexicons. Look. Here's
But in
the
that
lexicon.
analytical lexicon
Yeah,
that
this
I
is
have,
yeah.
it does tell you all the parts of that. form.
Yes, and those are the tense names. They don't vary. And
They won't
It's-
tell you the aspect in
no,
that
it's not going to
analytical?
tell you the aspect in here. They don't talk about aspect in the lexicon.
I'll have to look that up this week. I'm not gonna. Because for all of I didn't check that carefully in the verbs, but they have a long string of letters, and like
Yeah.
in an interlinear Bible,
Yeah, right.
is it not?
Those, yeah,
In that, none of that includes aspect.
no.
Okay.
And
Okay.
my, what I gave you, where is it? Yeah, my parsing codes. These are just going to be the names of the tenses. It's not going to tell you about aspect. So you're not going to get confused about aspect by looking at
So
the
what are we talking
lexicon.
about? I'm kind of. So can we look at a Greek verb and know what aspect it is?
Yes. Okay, here's an example. The imperfect tense, which we're going to get to, it's always continuous action in past time.
So aspect
That's-
is built into the tense. Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
it is.
Okay.
It's
All right.
built into the tense.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay. Okay.
that's true for the imperfect tense,
All right.
which is continuous action in past time.
Okay.
However, the present tense, and I've talked about this before, it's not definite whether it's going to be continuous action or
Okay.
simple
So this
action.
isn't something we're going to run across unless we're studying a bunch of books that linguists write.
That's right.
Because it
Yeah.
isn't an actual real thing in the Greek. It's talking about something that's a component of the tense.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
That was, yeah,
There you go.
That-
That
that
makes
was-
a lot of sense.
yeah.
Okay.
Now, the future tense has the same problem as the present tense. It could be either future simple or future continuous, just like the present could be either present simple or present continuous. And the form of the verb won't tell you what the aspect is. You have to get that from context. For instance, wait a minute. We better not get into examples till we get to the exercises. We'll talk about it then.
So
So,
are we going to get names for these tenses that we can understand contain these aspects?
we're going to
We're gonna
get
get there,
names
right?
of the tenses, which are,
Which then we can
They don't
understand to have to do with an aspect.
yeah,
Okay.
the present tense is one where you can't really tell what aspect it is from the form of the verb, the inflected form of the verb.
So
you have to figure that out from
The
the
Greek present tense could be continuous or simple.
That's
or,
correct.
Or
yes.
undefined, or
Yeah,
which I think is
simple
honest.
or undefined or the same thing.
Okay.
You guys on the Zoom, do you understand what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I'm sorry it gets confusing, but
So in Greek, it would be the same word for I study and I am studying.
that's
That
right.
would be
It would
the
be
same
in the
verb
inflected
conjugation.
form.
And okay, and something a translator might be trying to decide is which of those English conceptions of that action are actually appropriate for the Greek word that's being used.
Exactly. I was trying to think
Okay.
of an example.
That's a translational decision that we have to make because our language marks a difference between those
Yeah.
that their language did not, at least not in the conjugation of the verb. Okay.
So help us then in that statement. Then his examples are not in the simple Greek present tense. Because I mean, he just made this whole thing about the way the Greek verbs were that would lead to one aspect or the other. And in the English, it says they were, so they must have been past tense Greek verbs or something. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so different tenses, I think Carl was saying there's
So in
that's
the
an issue in the
past tense, there
present
is
tense, but not.
differences in the
Yeah,
inflections?
in this one particular tense called the imperfect tense, it's always a continuous action in past time.
Okay.
But there are other past tenses in Greek.
Okay, that are not.
For instance, the aorist and also
Okay.
the perfect tense. Oh, wait a minute.
That's okay, but we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
I
you,
mean,
thank
it's
you. I
like-
think I'm following.
Okay. Now, I'm reluctant
Thank
to
you.
read from our textbook, which is 4th edition. It's confusing, and I marked up my text, and you've got my markups on this handout where I scratched out what I didn't want to use and put in the terms that we used in the 2nd and 3rd edition.
So later on in the book, my question I have about that is later going further in his book, is he going to be calling these things
I
the
don't think it's
perfect
going.
aspect? It doesn't really come up.
I don't think it's going to be coming up very
Okay.
much.
All right.
Okay.
There's more
In
than
the textbook, 15.11 on page 153, voice refers to the relationship between the subject and the verb. If the subject does the action of the verb, then the verb is in the active voice. Bill hit the ball. Hit is in the active voice because the subject Bill did the hitting. If the subject receives the action of the verb is in the passive voice. Bill was hit by the ball. Was hit is in the passive voice because the subject Bill was hit. The passive voice is formed in English by adding a helping verb, was, in the example above, to the past participle. Is that understandable? Active versus passive in English? Okay. Mood refers to the relationship between the verb and reality. A verb in the indicative mood. Trouble, David?
Yeah, no, I'm just laughing because the simpler way to say Bill was hit by the ball is simply to say the ball hit Bill. But
Yeah, but then you're making an active voice.
I
stance.
understand there, which is
Yeah.
okay.
You can say the same thing using the active voice, but you have to switch the subject and
Yes, you
the
do.
object around.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
So
But-
it could
In
be
these cases when you would use active voice, like you'd say the ball hit Bill after it bounced off the plate.
Yeah.
It'd be a really bad pitch, but it could happen.
Yeah.
um
Oh, all right.
okay, so Bill threw the ball, active voice.
Yeah.
The ball was thrown by Bill, passive
Yes.
voice, same
Well,
meaning.
Same meaning, different voice.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, mood. Are we ready for this?
Probably not.
Refers to the relationship between the verb and reality. A verb in the indicative mood describes something that is, as opposed to something that may or might be, which is a subjunctive mood. This includes statements and questions. For example, I am rich. Are you rich? Both of those are in the indicative mood, even though it's a question rather than a statement. Language is only a portrayal of reality. Just because a verb is in the indicative doesn't mean it's true. It just means that the speaker or writer is presenting information as something that is, not as something that may or may not be.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But-
in other words, that's probably explains why at the Defense Language Institute, they would refer to one as a statement of fact versus a statement contrary to fact.
Okay,
To define, so whether it's telling the truth or lying, if you're in indicative mood, you're presenting it as fact.
mhm,
And contrary to fact would be subjunctive mood.
Yeah.
Once again, whether it's true or false.
plus the fact the speaker or writer may be mistaken.
Agree.
Yeah.
He may be
You
telling
may
a
believe
lie,
it's
but.
true.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
just
makes
wondering
us
why
feel-
we have to point this out, just because,
Well,
it's like saying you shouldn't believe everything you read. I mean,
Well,
Is
this
there
will
something
become
different
more
being said here?
important when we get to
I just-
something like the subjunctive mood or
well, okay.
conditional
I'm just wondering
sentences.
if this statement means something other than the very simple statement, you shouldn't believe everything you read.
Well,
Is there something else being said here?
Yeah.
I mean, that's an honest question. Is there something more significant being said here? Other than that fact that you've written it down doesn't make it so.
no, it
Okay,
doesn't.
all right.
No, he's just
All right.
describing the names and the structures.
Okay. Greek grammar. Don't try to learn Greek forms in this chapter. They're just given to expose you to the concepts. You'll start learning the actual forms in the next chapter. Agreement. In Greek, the verb agrees with its subject by using personal endings, which are suffixes added to the end of the verb. For example, omega is a first-person singular personal ending, and therefore lego means I say. Usi is a third-person plural personal ending, and therefore legusi means they say. Now here's the paradigm of the verbal root. Aku means to hear. We get our word acoustic from that. But akuo, the ending o is first person singular. It means I hear. Aku ace is the ending, same stem though. Aku ace means you singular hear. Aku a means he, she, or it hears. Akuomen, omen is the ending, meaning we hear. Akuete, it's a second person plural, meaning you plural hear. And then akuusi means they hear. So the ending, the part he's got in blue letters, is the ending that's added to the verbal stem, which he calls a root. There's a difference between root and stem, but we'll talk about that later.
Oh,
I know it's a
Okay.
lot. When we, I think I'm not going to make any assignment tonight other than reread this and try
Okay.
to understand it better.
Reread this a bunch of times.
Yeah, as much as you need.
all right.
Person. As in English, there are three persons. First person is a person speaking. Ego, emes. Remember those personal pronouns? Emi, esmen, akuo, akuomen. That's all first person forms. Ego and emes are the first person personal pronouns. Ego means I, emes means we. Emi is that verb that we learned.
And
I am. Esmen is we are. Akuo, the ending omega, which we just learned, is I hear. Akuomen is we hear.
Okay.
All of those are forms of first person. Some of them singular, some of them plural. Second person is the person spoken to. Sue and humace are the personal pronouns in the second person. Sue is singular, meaning you singular. Humace is you plural. A is the second person singular of a me. That means you singular are. Este is the second person plural of a me, meaning you plural are. Akues, that ace ending that we just saw in that paradigm, that's second person singular of akuo, meaning you here, you singular here. Akueta, the eta ending, is the plural second person ending. That means you all here. Is that understandable?
We hear you. Okay, so yeah.
Third person is the
you,
person or thing spoken about. Autos and logoi. Let's take autos first. Autos is a third person personal pronoun, singular, meaning he, she, or it. And logoi is the oi ending is, hold on.
Cheat sheet.
That one doesn't belong there.
No. No.
I think he skipped that word. Estin,
Oh, no.
he, she, or it is. That's singular, third person. Asin, they are. Those are forms of the verb ame. Why is that word there? I think he's trying to, he should have put autus. No, autor. What? 120. Yeah, he should have put autoi instead of logoi.
Logoi.
Yeah, that's the
Uh-huh.
third person
okay, I see what
plural.
you're saying.
Yeah,
Because autos, and then we're talking about
the oi ending.
the plural is oi. Yeah, autoi.
Logoi.
Yeah, that would be I. Is
Yeah,
that
logoi is.
they
first
say?
person. Yeah, logoi is first person plural of the word logos. Logos.
That's the word.
But we're talking
That's
about
supposed to be autoi.
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 Oh my God.
Yeah, because it's the personal pronouns for the third person in singular and plural is what he's given us. Like ego, a mace, so that's I and we, right? And Sue and humace, which is you and you plural, and then it would be autos and autoi, they and they all, or them all,
Although,
or whatever.
aren't any noun that's the subject of a verb that's not a personal pronoun is in the third person.
Yeah. And then
Is that just an
estin and
example?
asin are the forms.
Is he just making an example that it could be like
It could be any random noun if it's
any
the
random
verb is
noun?
third
What he's
person.
trying to
Yeah.
say.
I think that's what.
Yeah,
he's
but it
doing.
doesn't fit the pattern of the first two bullet
No.
points. It's kind of confusing. That's all.
So it's not wrong. It just doesn't fit what we see.
Yeah.
All right. Gosh,
Okay.
sometimes.
A verb must agree with its subject in person. It does this by using the appropriate personal ending. Ace is a normal ending for second person singular. Therefore, if the subject is you, Sue, the verb could end in ace. Su leges means you say. But, you know, we've talked about this before. The pronoun is unnecessary because it's implied in the verb with that verbal ending.
Mhm.
If the subject is we, hey mace, the verb could end in amen. Hey mace, legamen means we say. Because the Greek verb indicates person, a Greek sentence does not require an expressed subject. A verb by itself can be a complete sentence. Both ego, akuo, and akuo mean I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it say the verb could end? What else would it end in?
Where are you reading?
So the previous 2 bullet points, it Sue, the verb, it could end in ace.
Oh,
And then what else would it end in?
It'd be irregular.
Oh, all right.
No? Am I misspeaking,
well,
Carl?
if it's present tense, it would end in ace. But if it's a different tense,
Okay.
it could end in something else.
All right. Is that what's meant?
Oh.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. It just seemed like a very
Yeah.
strange statement because we're talking about present tense. So
Yeah.
it just got it.
Scratch the word
Got it.
could.
Got it. It's
Yeah.
fine. All right.
All right. Number. This is all kind of repetitive, but verbs are either singular or plural in order to agree with their subject. Different personal endings are used to differentiate number. If the subject is I, then the personal ending is first person singular. That's so, there's nothing hard to understand about that section there. Let's go into tense. 15, 17, tense. Greek grammar uses the term tense differently from how it is used in English grammar. In English, tense refers to time when the action occurred, past. When the action occurred, past. When it occurs, present, or when it will occur, future. In Greek, a tense carries 2 connotations, aspect and time. For example, the aorist tense describes a, and I'm scratched out the word perfective and put undefined.
He does use
Yeah.
the tense. So here we go. We got to battle his
That
text.
word perfective, he uses the terms perfective and imperfective to describe an aspect. Instead of those, I want to use undefined and continuous.
So perfective is undefined.
That's right.
That's a better word. Why is?
Yeah.
I know, because when you say perfective, I would think complete,
Yeah.
which that would
Yeah.
be defined. I would.
Yeah. That's why I don't like them. I scratched out those words in my book, and I made you copies of what I did in my book.
The aorist tense describes an undefined aspect.
Yeah.
This normally occurs in the past.
Yeah. Normal.
Okay.
So aorist is, would you
Aorist
call
is one of the past tenses,
got it?
but it's an
It's an undefined, okay, aspect. Yeah. Okay.
It could be continuous, or it could be something else, but it doesn't tell you that. It's
So
just
that would be
undefined.
closer to,
Simple.
would we
past.
call it in English the past perfect, which is I
or
did
ate.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those two
Versus
are simple past.
Simple past.
Simple or
That's-
undefined.
Right.
That is similar at least to the Greek aorist. I
Yeah.
did it.
That's
And
correct.
I'll come back and ask, I think I asked this question at the very beginning, but repeat it. If I understand aorist correctly, the real reason the person speaking would use aorist is because it's immaterial to the point they're making as
Yeah.
to whether it's complete or incomplete.
Immaterial or unnecessary or
Yeah.
unknown, perhaps.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily imply that it's a simple past, but
Right.
it's not important to the guy writing.
That's
Exactly.
right. Mhm.
That's the right way to
Yeah.
understand aorist.
Wait,
Yeah.
so is is there a different tense for, is there a different Greek past tense that would imply that it is a completed action, that it is not
Yes.
continuous?
Yes, there is.
Oh,
It's called the
gosh.
perfect tense, but the perfect is, now this.
Oh, shoot. Now I see
understand,
the terminology. Okay.
Perfect means completed.
Is this not,
Yeah, got it.
so let's
Okay.
look at, if it's okay, can we talk about the English past tenses here? Because
Okay,
if it's okay, I ask this question,
Yeah.
because I can say I ran, and
yes,
that's an English simple past tense.
or
And that's
undefined.
close to the aorist. But I could say I did run,
Yeah,
which is completed.
also, yeah,
or I am, no, how would you say?
No.
I have been running. No, how would you say that past?
I was running.
I was running. No, it's still all the way in
that's
the past.
continuous.
That's continuous. I
Yeah.
was running, but it's all in the past.
Yeah,
And
I have been running, I think
Yeah.
maybe.
that brings it from the past to the present.
I thought
So I
that-
guess the question I have is, does the Greek have a specific tense that is I did run?
no. I did run and I ran are two different ways of saying the same thing.
With the
for
aorist.
aorist, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the aorist contains our did run as
Yeah.
well as I
Yeah,
ran.
that auxiliary verb did, that's a form of the verb to do. That's an English concession to, I mean, that's not the right way to say it. For instance, in questions, did you go?
Sure.
Or went you? Is how the,
Sure.
That's-
I did run.
yeah.
I
I
ran.
ran, I did run, are both the same way
They really
to
have the same
express
meaning.
the undefined aspect in past time,
Okay.
which is the Greek aorist tense.
Okay. All right.
Now, this might help you. The term aorist, the name of that tense, comes from the alpha, which is a negation, and horizo. Horizo is the word for, we get our word horizon from it.
Oh,
Now, the horizon is a boundary, a definite point between, if you have an unblocked view of the ocean, you can see the line between the water and the sky. That's the horizon. And that's a defined point.
Mm-hmm.
But you put the alpha in front of the horizo, aorist, it's undefined because there's no specific point. Does that make sense?
yeah.
It's
I
undefined.
can think of a really
But it's making it kind of
fantastic
worse.
example, but
But
I don't know if you'd have to be there to understand it. But when we used to fly in Saudi Arabia and fly night missions, when we were flying back home at night, you had this totally black sky with little dots that were in it. And the desert below us was totally black, but there were Bedouin out there with campfires.
Oh,
And I could not tell where the horizon was and what was sky with stars and what was ground with campfires.
wow.
And
Well,
it just all,
so Carl,
everything looked the same. It
this
was
kind
like in a sphere that looked like the sky.
Okay.
that explanation makes me think, just the explanation kind of makes me think that the aorist is something that says an action happened, might be still happening, and could continue happening in the
Yeah,
future.
yeah.
And I'm not telling you.
That's right.
It could mean
Mhm.
it's always been happening and always will happen.
Yes,
The
you could.
aorist is the one you would use to say that,
Yes, you could. But
because
if
you
you
don't
wanted to
have that in mind.
But if you wanted to specify something about aspect, you'd use a different tense.
Sure, but the aorist could mean anything from, something happened and I don't care when, to a very powerful statement that says it's an ongoing, continuous, always will be, and always has happened.
So this makes me wonder, in the
Is that true?
Septuagint, when
Just a second. I think that's a true statement because aorist, just doesn't define,
So before
the
Moses was, I
continuation of
am,
the
would be aorist.
Yeah.
maybe.
yeah, here,
I mean, that's kind of what I have in mind is,
the name of God in the Old Testament.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
In the Septuagint, when Moses asked God in the burning bush what to call him,
Yeah.
is that translated in the aorist and the answer translated in the aorist
I
in
am
the
who
Septuagint?
ego
am.
eimi.
That I am?
I think it's the present tense, which is not, but see, the present tense in Greek, and I don't know about Hebrew, I think it's also true in Hebrew, it could take the form of continuous action or it could take the form of undefined action. But in the case of God's name, he has always existed, he always will exist, and I've heard it described eternally present.
well,
Eternally.
we're just kind of wondering what the Greek expression is for
Yeah.
this.
Well, ego, eimi, ha.
Actually, you wrote something on it. We should read it.
Yeah, I did.
Maybe we should table this question.
Okay.
All right.
Well, up to this point, have you understood what we're talking about with?
Okay.
Maybe it's better to say, I think I've understood what it is that I need to understand.
Yeah.
I don't completely have it yet, though.
Okay.
Tense. Okay. So tense, aspect,
Where were
and
we? Yeah.
time.
The term tense, Greek grammar uses the term tense differently from how it is used in English grammar.
Yeah. So
Is that where we were?
Yeah,
Yeah.
time and is it
Aspect,
continuous? or
In
something?
English, tense refers to time when the action occurred, past occurs, present, or will occur. Oh, I read that already. I'm in 1517.
So at this point, aspect has been talked about as something that can having continuous action or a progression,
Either
or
continuous or undefined.
Undefined.
Yeah.
But so the way I learned English was that is that the word tense also, the way we talk about tense, we talk about present tense or we talk about past tense and past perfect tense. And so we talked about those as different tenses.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it also contains the aspect. I'm
Yeah.
a little bit confused by why we're.
Yeah, but to form aspect in English,
You use a helping verb.
Helping verb.
Well, that's fair enough, but we call that as part of the tense when we talk about English.
Yeah.
I'm just okay. I don't want. That's what's a little confusing about this write-up, because I don't know what else I would call it in English.
Yeah.
In parsing English verbs, but I have to include that as part of the tense, right?
Yeah.
The one thing I know is that linguists and grammarians terminology evolves over time, and I think that's what we're fighting with at the moment.
It is, yeah.
All right.
Just people from different generations of study using different terminology for the same thing.
So far, this term aspect has to do with time in the same way that we talk about it in English.
Mhm.
I mean, except that the tenses don't line out exactly the same way. This aorist might not just be in the past, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Which
It
is
might
different.
not.
We don't have an English like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. That's what makes it a foreign language.
Well, no, that's okay. I'm just saying that is different.
Exactly.
But there is a time aspect. I just haven't told you what it is.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Therefore, in 1517, I use the term tense to refer only to the form of the Greek verb. For instance, present tense, future tense, aorist tense. I use the term time to describe when the action of the verb occurs. Okay, I don't have any trouble with those statements.
Yeah. So long as we tell those what it works.
Do not confuse tense and time, because in Greek, tense has more than just time. It has aspect as well.
Again,
or lack of
Listen.
aspect.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, but
1518, time. As in English, the time of the verb is from the standpoint of the speaker or writer, not the reader. What is present to the biblical writer may or may not be present to us. Aspect. Now I'm going to scratch out what he. Okay, this is perhaps the most difficult concept in Greek verbs, and yet the most important, most misunderstood. I thought we read this
We
already.
did.
What?
he's edited in here
Mm,
and just
Read
because.
it over the English.
Oh,
part.
that's right.
It
Yeah.
appeared in a
Okay.
Yep.
First bullet
Yeah.
point. He uses the term perfective. Scratch that out and call it undefined. The second bullet point, he uses the term imperfective. I scratched that out and called it continuous.
All right. So
okay, so
he's making a big thing about tense versus time. Are these different?
Now that
Well,
tense versus time is,
when we get into well, I'm sorry, the actual complete verb,
yeah,
are those different prefixes and suffixes
No.
and changes, or are that all
No.
contained in
yeah.
it
The
together?
same form of the verb could be undefined,
So it could be
or it
undefined.
could be continuous.
Right?
That's true in the present tense, especially.
But it's not true in every tense, Carl.
No.
Okay, which is why he separates the concepts.
Well,
Yeah.
what I'm bothered by is there's a great deal of emphasis on this, but when we go to actually conjugate the verb, the conjugation is going to contain uniquely these two things. He's talking about time and aspect. Is
When we parse a verb,
that true? It's not like they're
Okay,
different
here's
pieces
the
of it.
first exercise. We're going to parse it and giving third person plural, present tense. Now that present tense, we're not going to say anything about aspect there. It's just simply the name of the tense in Greek.
But it
present
has an
tense.
aspect, doesn't it?
Well, it might be continuous and it might be undefined.
And I can't tell by the
You
verb.
can't tell by the form of that verb. No, it's just simply present tense. The context of that verse might give you clues to whether it should be
So
continuous.
the Greek doesn't tell us
No,
the
the Greek-
aspect?
The form of the Greek verb will not tell you about aspect in the present tense.
In the present tense, but
Yeah,
it will
but
in
in
others.
In a tense called the imperfect tense, it will always be continuous aspect. In a tense called aorist, it will always be undefined aspect, but not so in the present tense. The present tense is ambiguous as far as aspect goes. And you have to make a
Okay, I think
decision.
I'm following this, but it's become. Okay, we have a lot of tenses in English and we just describe them as what they are. And it
Yeah.
seems that an approach to Greek would be to simply describe these different tenses. And the fact that present tense doesn't have a continuous specifically, that you have to decide that.
Yeah,
It's just the way the Greek is.
that's just the way the Greek
And it
is.
doesn't necessarily divide these into two different categories.
No,
It's okay, but it's a
I
little
think
bit
it's
hard to
probably
follow.
something linguists do in
Yeah,
general.
it's just not very
that
helpful, and
the
honestly,
many
but
different
okay, I can
languages.
tolerate it. I'm just going, all right, you're
Okay,
like
we're
splitting
reading a book
hair
by
with
a
how we
linguist.
look at the
Maybe
Greek. Okay,
here's an example. The second one in the warm-up. I translated it, you hear his voice or you are hearing his voice.
okay, that's fine.
It's the same word, same form. Phone,
All right.
akues. You hear or you are hearing.
So in this one, we're just doing present tense.
It's all called.
So we
yeah.
won't have in that exercises, we won't have anything about the aspect.
Right.
But when we
You'll
get
have
to
to
another
decide.
tense, we will have aspect
Right.
as part of the verb.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think what we get in this is, in the translation, is we really do kind of get something that moves toward possible English tenses. Okay, and
Parallel.
some of them, yeah, they will have a set of possible English tenses.
Mhm.
And some will be perhaps an exact English tense, and others might encompass multiple English
Yeah.
tenses. That's really where we're going,
Yeah.
right?
Because we saw in that chart about English verbs, it could be a continuous or it could be an
Sure.
undefined.
Okay.
And both of those in the present tense are, you can't tell which one it is in the
Okay.
Greek. You have to make a decision about it. Back in the textbook now, we are out of
I'm
time.
sorry. We're close you down.
I think we better save this for, let's not rush over this so much. You can read on your own the rest of this,
Should've read
but
it
we'll
first,
talk
and then-
about it next week.
I mean, because we're really pretty much, I think, getting into the most complex part of it.
Yes, we are.
This is, yeah, thank you. This, thanks for answering my.
Well, I hope I answered it adequately.
You have, you've done a good job. Well, I think so.
Okay.
I assume it's accurate.
Well, I did have this buried Greek treasure, but I think I'll just let you take it home and read it on your own because we're out of time. It's I did give you a copy, didn't I?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so you can post that.
Yeah.
Well, we stumbled through that. But I wish we had gotten farther, but we'll just save the rest for next week. Is that all right with everybody?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
We just kind of stopped and turned over every rock we could find.
You have to, I guess the slowest member of the class.
Well, it's valuable, David, for you to ask these questions because I didn't think of what
Well-
might have been confusing until you brought it up.
I think it's the way that he goes about this is, as you've said,
Yeah.
he's approaching it from some theoretical model that we don't really understand or appreciate. And it might be more straightforward to take some of these tenses and say what English things they can contain.
Mhm.
And I think that would be a more straightforward approach for me.
Okay.
And that's really okay because I mean we got what we got. It's really okay, but I'm just as I'm going through this, I'm wondering where does this result in an actual Greek verb?
Yeah.
Well, when we get the
Yeah,
exercise,
it'll
it'll
make
start to
sense.
click.
Yeah.
And this was certainly not his most shining moment for picking clear examples.
No. You might want to do what I did and scratch out the confusing terminology in your book and
We'll try to keep track what it means because I think we're going to keep encountering it.
yeah.
Hey, Carl, there's an overview for the section, and I did read it before it came, and I noted that there's a kind of an error in it. And
Where is
if
it?
it's useful, I wanted to point it out. Let me see. Because let me see if I can see where it is on page 147.
47.
Yeah. He claims that the active voice has an ending of, and by just by looking at his convention on the type that he's using, the font, it appears to be nu sigma iota, and that's not right. It should be.
Oh, yes, but he
It's-
explains.
It's a type. Isn't that a typographical error?
No,
It
it's
means
not.
Oopsilon?
But he explains it somewhere else.
No, he doesn't mean new, right? He means oopsilon. Isn't that a simple typo of the font? A misuse of the. It should be an oopsilon.
No, it's a new.
Really?
Yes.
Where?
I'm going. It's on page 147, the top. It's the paradigm of Luo, and the third person plural ending. On the left, it's usi, but on the right, it's unsi, nu sigma iota. That is correct, but he explains it somewhere else. I think when we talked about, I'll have to find it.
Okay. All right. Never mind. It's going to get there, and for some reason, new turns into oopsilon.
Yeah. Well, it has to do with
Some irregularity in vowels.
remember we talked about contract. Didn't we talk about? No.
That's okay. It's not an
Contraction.
error in the book. It's just I don't know enough to understand
Yeah.
it yet.
I'll find it and
Okay.
point it out to you next week.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I remember scratching my head over that for a long time too.
I figured it was just an error.
No, it's not.
Okay. It doesn't
But,
explain it at all. Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Could I have one of you guys pray?
Let's
Please.
so we'll stop our recording.
Yeah, we'll stop the recording.
Say bye to everyone.
Goodbye.
All right.